Hey everyone, it's Nick. I never thought I'd be posting here, but I guess life has a way of dragging you back into things you thought you left behind. I grew up in a small town in Colorado with my dad, Jack. He ran a tiny art supply shop, nothing fancy, just one of those cozy places that smelled like oil paint and old wood. If you walked in on any given day, you'd find him hunched over a canvas in the back, smudges of charcoal on his hands, humming some old rock song under his breath. That shop wasn't just his business, it was his whole world. And by extension, it became mine too. My mom, Lauren, never fit into that world. She was all about appearances, obsessed with success, always talking about her wealthy personal training clients. To her, our little shop and creaky house were just dead weight, something holding her back from the life she thought she deserved. I was 13 when she left. It was a Thursday. I remember that because Dad had promised we'd get burgers after he closed the shop, and I had been counting down the minutes. When I came downstairs, expecting the usual smell of coffee and burnt toast, the kitchen was silent. No plates clattering, no humming, just my dad, sitting at the table, staring at a letter with this hollow look on his face. I took it from his shaking hands before he could stop me. Jack, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving with Ryan. He can give me the life I deserve. Not this small-town nonsense. Nick, don't bother looking for me. You're just dead weight, and I don't need either of you holding me back. My throat went dry. I looked up at Dad, hoping, praying, he'd say something to make it better. But he just sat there, gripping his coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him upright. That was the moment everything changed. For years, it was just me and him, trying to keep things afloat. Money was tight, but we managed. I spent every afternoon at the shop, organizing paint tubes, sweeping the floors, helping customers. It wasn't much, but it was ours. And for a while, that was enough. Then, when I was 17, life hit us with another punch. Dad got sick. Stage 4 cancer. I remember standing in that doctor's office, the smell of antiseptic burning my nose, as some guy in a white coat explained how little time we had left. Dad took it better than I did. He even laughed, said something about how, at least now I won't have to deal with tax season. I didn't laugh. The next year was a blur of hospital visits, late-night breakdowns, and pretending everything was fine. He fought like hell, but in the end, it didn't matter. I held his hand when he went. I don't remember what I said. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But I remember the way his fingers twitched once, just barely, before going still. And just like that, I was alone. I was 22 when I inherited everything. The shop, the house, and a small apartment near my college that Dad had bought so I wouldn't have to worry about rent. It was overwhelming, but I managed. Kept the shop running, juggled school, did what I had to do. And then, a year after he passed, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Nick, a voice said. It's me. Lauren. I went cold. It had been almost 10 years. No calls. No letters. Nothing. And now, out of nowhere, she was just back? I'm in town, she continued, like we were old friends catching up. I'd love to see you. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to hang up, to tell her to go to hell. But some sick, broken part of me needed to know why. Why now? Why after all this time? So, like an idiot, I agreed to meet her. I barely slept the night before meeting her. My body was exhausted, but my brain wouldn't shut up. Memories I hadn't thought about in years clawed their way to the surface. Mom snapping at Dad for being too soft, the way she used to sigh dramatically whenever she had to help out in the shop, the sharp, cold edge in her voice the night she left. By the time I walked into Rosie's cafe, my stomach was in knots. I told myself to expect nothing. No apologies. No remorse. Just whatever story she had rehearsed to make herself look good. And I was right. She was already sitting at a booth near the window, stirring her coffee like she had all the time in the world. She looked the same. Maybe a few more lines around her eyes, maybe a little less polished than I remembered, but still Lauren. Still composed. Still the woman who had walked out on us without a second thought. But what I wasn't expecting was the kid sitting next to her. He looked about 16, awkward, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to be here. He glanced at me, then quickly looked down at his hands. Mom beamed when she saw me. Nick, you look so grown up. I sat down slowly, ignoring the fake warmth in her voice. My throat felt tight. I couldn't decide if I wanted to punch the table or walk out. She gestured toward the kid. This is Josh, she said. Your brother. My stomach dropped. Brother. That word didn't make sense coming from her. She wasn't a mother. Not really. Josh shifted uncomfortably. Hey. I nodded stiffly. I didn't blame him for any of this, but my brain was too busy catching up to process him properly. Mom sighed, like this whole thing was so hard for her. I know this is a shock, but I really wanted you to meet him. And I was hoping we could reconnect. There it was. The real reason she called. Reconnect. I repeated, my voice flat. After 10 years? She pressed her lips together. I made mistakes. I laughed, sharp and humorless. That's one way to put it. Josh shifted in his seat again. His eyes flicked between us, like he was watching a game he didn't understand. Mom leaned forward, lowering her voice like we were sharing some big secret. Look, Nick, things didn't work out the way I planned. Ryan, he's not in the picture anymore. And money's been tight. There it was. Oh. I sat back. So that's why you're here. Her face twitched. Just for a second. Like she wasn't expecting me to catch on so fast. Nick, don't be like that. She forced a soft, wounded smile. We're family. I stared at her. Family? She left us. Left me. Called me dead weight in a note, and never looked back. She didn't even show up when Dad was dying. I clenched my jaw. What do you want? I asked. She sighed again, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, preparing for whatever act she had rehearsed in the mirror before coming here. I heard you have an apartment, she said carefully. Josh and I just need a place to stay for a little while. Just until we get back on our feet. I let out a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table. No. She blinked. Like she genuinely hadn't considered that I might say no. Nick, come on. It wouldn't be forever. Just a few months. You mean like how you were supposed to be my mom forever? I shot back. Her jaw tightened. Josh looked more and more uncomfortable. He was practically sinking into his seat. She tried again, her voice softer now, like she thought I just needed convincing. Look, I get it. You're angry. But I'm trying to fix things now. Don't you think we deserve a second chance? I should have told her to get lost. Should have walked out right then and there. But then I looked at Josh. He wasn't part of this. He wasn't the one who left. He wasn't the one who tore my life apart. He just looked stuck. Just like I had been. I exhaled slowly. Fine, I muttered. Mom's whole face lit up, like she had won. But only for a few months, I added quickly. And you pay for utilities. Her smile twitched, but she nodded. Of course, sweetheart. And right then, I knew, deep in my gut, I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The first few weeks were quiet. Too quiet. I barely heard from Lauren. No texts. No calls. No sudden guilt-tripping messages. For a second, just a second, I let myself think, maybe this won't be so bad. Maybe she'd actually do what she said. Find a job. Get her life together. Move out when the time came. But deep down, I knew better. And then it started. At first, it was little things. A text from her one afternoon. Hey, Nick. The water bill was higher than I expected. Any chance you could cover it this month? I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. There it was. The first crack in the lie. You agreed to handle utilities, I texted back. She didn't answer for a while. Then, I know, but money's tight right now. Just this once. I exhaled slowly. There it is. The start of the slow, creeping pattern. The little pushes to see how far she could go. No, I replied. She didn't respond. A few days later, I was driving past the apartment on my way back from the shop when something told me to stop. A gut feeling. The kind you don't ignore. Josh answered the door. He looked surprised to see me. Nick? Hey. I was in the area, I said, stepping inside before he could stop me. The place was a mess. Dishes piled up in the sink. Clothes draped over the couch. Unopened mail stacked on the table. Like they hadn't even tried to settle in. Like they were waiting for someone else to clean up the mess. Lauren walked out of the bedroom, phone in hand. When she saw me, she sighed dramatically. Nick, you should really call before coming over. I ignored her, scanning the disaster zone around me. What's going on here? I asked, my voice tight. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, please. We've just been busy. Don't act like you've never let a few dishes pile up. Josh looked away, shifting uncomfortably. Busy doing what? I asked. Looking for work, she said smoothly. Bullshit. I knew that tone. Knew that fake, airy confidence. Have you even started looking for a place? Lauren rolled her eyes. Nick, don't be so dramatic. We just need a little more time. I clenched my jaw. Mom, it's been over a month. Her smile faded. I know, she said, her voice taking on that sharp edge I remembered from when I was a kid. And things have been harder than I expected. You think I like asking you for help? I gave up everything for you, Nick. That hit something deep in me. A spark of rage, small but growing. You didn't give up anything, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You left. Silence. Josh stood there, frozen between us. Lauren's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. You're just like your father, she muttered. And just like that, I was 13 again, standing in the kitchen, listening to her tear him down while he just stood there, taking it. I wasn't going to be him. You have 2 months, I said, turning toward the door. Then you're out. Lauren scoffed. Oh, come on, Nick. You're really going to do this? To family. I gritted my teeth. You stopped being my family a long time ago. And then I walked out. For a while, nothing changed. No texts. No calls. Just silence. But then my aunt called. The second I picked up, she launched into me. Nick, what the hell is wrong with you? I blinked. Excuse me. Your mother just told me you're trying to kick her and Josh onto the streets. After everything she's been through. I felt my stomach twist. That's not what's happening, I said. Really? Because it sounds like you're being a selfish little brat. I clenched my jaw. Did she tell you she hasn't paid a single bill? That she promised this was temporary? Silence. She said she's struggling, Nick. Yeah? So was Dad. And she never looked back. That shut her up. The next day, I checked Facebook. And there it was. A long, dramatic post from Lauren about how I had abandoned my family. How I was leaving my own brother homeless. The comments were exactly what I expected. How could he do that to his mother? Family should always come first. Mothers sacrifice everything. And this is how she gets treated? My vision blurred with rage. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. She was trying to destroy me. And I wasn't going to let her. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the Facebook comments, the angry messages from distant relatives, the sheer audacity of Lauren twisting everything to make herself look like the victim. But more than anything, I kept hearing Dad's voice. You gotta stand your ground, kid. People like her, they'll take and take until there's nothing left. He was right. He'd always been right. And I wasn't going to let her do this to me. The next morning, I called Mr. Johnson. Nick, he greeted, sounding unsurprised. Figured I'd hear from you soon. She's turning everyone against me, I said, pacing my apartment. She's acting like I'm throwing her and Josh on the street. That's what people like her do, he said simply. You ready to move forward with the eviction? I hesitated. Not because I had any doubts about Lauren, but because of Josh. If I do this, he's caught in the middle, I muttered. Mr. Johnson was silent for a moment. Nick, I get it. But this isn't about him. You can't set yourself on fire to keep him warm. I let out a slow breath. File it. Lauren was served with the court summons 2 days later. I expected a meltdown. Some dramatic plea, some last-minute attempt to guilt me into backing down. Instead, she called me that night. I almost didn't pick up. But something in me, maybe morbid curiosity, made me press answer. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, you think you've won? I gritted my teeth. It's not a game, Mom. Oh, sweetheart, she murmured, voice dripping with condescension. You have no idea what I'm capable of. A cold chill crawled up my spine. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, my pulse pounding. That wasn't just manipulation. That was a threat. The next morning, I drove to the art shop early to open up. But the second I pulled into the parking lot, my stomach dropped. The front door was wide open. I jumped out of my car and ran inside. The place was trashed. Shelves overturned. Paint smeared across the floors. Canvases slashed apart like someone had taken a knife to them. And then I saw the counter. Spray painted in thick, red letters. Pay up. I took a shaky breath, my hands clenched into fists. This wasn't random. This wasn't some bored teenagers messing around. This was a message. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. I knew what I had to do. I called the police. They arrived within 15 minutes, took statements, snapped pictures. One of the officers, a guy in his 40s with tired eyes, sighed as he looked around. Looks personal, he muttered. Yeah, I said, my voice tight. Got any idea who might have done this? I thought of Lauren's voice on the phone. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I swallowed hard. I have a few. They filed the report, but I could tell they didn't expect to catch anyone. Just another case of vandalism in a small town. I spent the next few hours cleaning up, my hands shaking with anger. The shop would recover. I'd make sure of that. But Lauren? She was going to regret this. The day of the court hearing came faster than I expected. I sat outside the courtroom, my knee bouncing, fingers clenched around the eviction paperwork like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Mr. Johnson sat beside me, flipping through his notes, calm as ever. "You ready for this?" he asked, glancing at me over the rim of his glasses. I let out a slow breath. "Not really." He gave me a small nod. "It's going to be fine. She doesn't have a case. She's been living there rent-free, hasn't paid utilities, and has no legal claim to the apartment. The judge will see right through her." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But this was Lauren we were dealing with. She didn't fight fair. A few minutes later, the doors swung open, and she walked in, dressed to impress, like always. Hair perfect. A modest dress, just enough to make her look like a struggling single mother trying her best. And beside her, Josh. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Something twisted in my chest. He didn't deserve to be dragged into this, but there he was, sitting next to her, caught in the storm just like I had been years ago. The hearing started. Lauren's lawyer, a greasy-looking guy with an oily smile, stood first. "Your Honor, my client has been unfairly forced out of her home by her own son. She was promised a place to stay, and now she and her minor child are being left homeless." I nearly laughed. Promised? I had never promised her anything. Mr. Johnson stood up, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, the defendant has never paid rent, never contributed to utilities, and was given multiple chances to leave. This was meant to be a temporary arrangement, not a permanent living situation." Lauren put on her best heartbroken mother expression. "I was trying to get back on my feet," she said, voice thick with fake emotion. "But Nick, he's always resented me. This was never about money. He just wants to punish me for the past." I clenched my fists. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, is there any written agreement stating she could stay indefinitely?" "No, Your Honor," I said firmly. "She was never supposed to be there permanently. And she hasn't just overstayed, she's been manipulating everyone around her to make me look like the bad guy." Lauren gasped, as if I had slapped her. "That's not true." Mr. Johnson calmly slid some papers across the table. "Here are messages she sent to family members, twisting the story. Here are the unpaid bills. And here's a police report filed just last week after my client's business was vandalized, an incident we strongly believe is connected to her financial troubles." The judge's expression hardened. Lauren's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. She must have realized she was losing, because she went for the last trick she had, tears. "Your Honor, please," she whispered. "I just wanted a chance to reconnect with my son. I thought we could be a family again." Silence. Then, finally, the judge spoke. "I've seen enough." He turned to Lauren. "Ms. Carter, you have 14 days to vacate the apartment. If you fail to do so, law enforcement will remove you. This case is closed." I exhaled so hard my vision blurred for a second. It was over. Lauren stood frozen, her nails digging into the table. Then she turned to me, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you've won?" she hissed under her breath. I didn't answer. I just walked out. Josh texted me a week later. "She's packing." That was all it said. I thought about replying, about asking him what his plan was. But I didn't. I had done enough. 14 days later, I drove past the apartment. Empty. Lauren was gone. And for the first time in years, I could finally breathe.